We also look forward to offering a special tribute to the recently haunted house in Chapel Andrews. This wall garden theatre is the latest animation of the Barbados Museum case. And we are very pleased to be involved with CARIFESTA 15. But I should note that the time of the Barbados Museum's most recent development occurred in 1981 as part of the preparations for CARIFESTA 4, which was being hosted in Barbados. And it was at that point that government and the various partners looked at the space and determined that it could be part and parcel of the CARIFESTA program, both largely in terms of facilitating folk culture and some performance. And we have participated in every CARIFESTA since. But this is our first time of using this space for CARIFESTA 15, and we're looking forward to the results of that deliberation. Without any further ado, I would now like to invite Mr. Clyde Cage, my colleague on the board of the National Art Gallery, to come forward and do the more formal introductions.
Thank you, Anthony. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the
Cultural landscape 25 years on. Where to next? It's a production from the Barbados National Art Gallery, BNAG, and the International Art Critics Association, AICA, of the Southern Caribbean. We have a packed program for you, but I would first like to acknowledge some of the specially invited guests who may be here with us in person, but who have also joined us online. From the Government of Barbados, the Senator, Dr. the Honorable Chantal Munro-Knight of the Prime Minister's Office with responsibility for culture, and the Deputy Permanent Secretary of Culture, Ms. Michelle Maynard. We also welcome members of the Diplomatic Corps and other members of the Government of Barbados. Present with us, we have Alessandra Cummins, who you've met, Alison Thompson. Alessandra is chair of the Barbados National Art Gallery, and Alison is president of AICA. So we have the two top A's from both those organizations here with us. We have a cadre of very distinguished invited guests, who I'm sure you're all looking forward to what they will have to say in the conversations that we have this afternoon. Also want to welcome fellow colleagues from the Barbados National Art Gallery Board, members of AICA, attendees here with us in person and online, and a very special welcome to all visiting Barbados for CARIFESTA 15. I am Clyde Cave. I'm a pediatrician and a member of the Barbados National Art Gallery Board. My promise this afternoon is if any children here get sick, I know what to do. And if anybody goes into premature labor, I can help. But apart from that, I promise to try and keep the speakers to time for you, because the program is really quite long. Before I get to some details of the program, there are a few housekeeping notes that I must share. The washrooms are on the other side of the courtyard, in that direction. The easiest access is probably through the back of the room. There is a water station at the back for those of you who feel thirsty and the need. And in the event of any hazards, please follow the directions that you'll be given as how to exit the space. Our program this afternoon consists of 3 conversations And there will be conversations with invited guests, so it's not going to be a question and answer period. Unfortunately, any one of these topics, if we had questions and answers, would consume the entire time. It'll be followed by a special screening of work by Versha Harris, a book launch as a tribute to Alison Chapman Andrews. And I'll tell you now, the books will be on sale. They're $60 and unfortunately cash only, so you can call your friends and ask them to deliver the money to the front desk for you. Unfortunately, no credit card machines are working. And at the end, we have a special welcome for you to join us for the opening of Crystal Lattices, Reflections, Refractions, which is the presentation of the Barbados National Art Gallery and the Barbados Gallery of Art Collections, which you will be able to view for the first time. To give context to this afternoon's discussions, I would like to welcome the two A+, Dr. Alison Thompson, who is president of AICA SC, also the deputy chair of the Barbados National Art Gallery Board, and Alessandra Cummins, who you have already met, who chairs the National Gallery Board and is the treasurer of AICA Southern Caribbean.
Come there. Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's good to have everybody here. We're happy to welcome you to the Cultural Landscape 25 years on. Where to next? Organized, as has been said, and hosted by the Barbados National Art Gallery and AICA Southern Caribbean. We are a quarter of the way into the 21st century, and it feels like a good moment to reflect back on what has happened in the cultural landscape of the Caribbean during the last 25 years. We're also marking the 25th anniversary of the Barbados National Art Gallery project, which began in 1999 as the National Art Gallery Committee, and also 25 years for AICA Southern Caribbean, a regional chapter of the International Art Critics Association with members in Barbados, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Curacao, Jamaica, Haiti, as well as the Caribbean diaspora. There's a long history of collaboration between the two bodies, notably with the hosting of AICA International Congress in Barbados and Martinique in 2003, and the 10-year Black Diaspora Visual Arts Project coordinated with David A. Bailey, which included a wide range of local, regional, and international participants, including Stuart Hall and George Lamming, Akwi Enweiser, John Akomfra, Kara Walker, Alfredo Yar, Keith Piper, Ingrid Pollard, Christopher Cozier, Krista Thompson, Claire Tancon, Erica James, and many others, including those who are with us today. While it's important to acknowledge the achievements of the past, it's also important to confront the roadblocks that have frustrated our ambitions and shortchanged our artistic communities. The Barbados National Art Gallery, AICA Conversation 25, presents us with an opportunity to discuss the role of national galleries in the region and their relationship to other art institutions and art spaces in contributing to the growth of a Caribbean cultural landscape for the 21st century. The event is dedicated to the memory of Alison Chapman Andrews, an artist of tremendous significance in Barbados and the wider region, particularly for the way in which, through her paintings, she reimagined the Barbadian landscape. But Alison's contributions were wide-ranging. She was a staunch supporter of her fellow artists and the overall development of a vibrant art community, which, as she knew, included a national art gallery. So we're going to begin with Conversation 1, Reimagining the Caribbean Landscape. And I would like to invite to the stage our three speakers, our three participants, Therese Hatchety, Winston Kelman, and Catherine Kennedy.
Thank you very much. I have a note for the speakers from the booth at the back. We are being interpreted in French, transmitted in English, with a special Spanish translator for our guest. So speakers, they've asked if you would speak clearly and distinctly so that the translators can keep up with you. So Alison, over to you.
Okay, this is on. We're working. We're good? All right. So I'd like to begin by introducing you to our three participants today. Therese Hatchety lectures in the Faculty of Culture, Creative and Performing Arts at UWI Cave Hill. She holds a degree in art history from the University of Copenhagen and a PhD in cultural studies from UWI Cave Hill. Her dissertation was centered on generational dynamics in visual art from the Anglophone Caribbean and was published as The Making of a Caribbean Avant-Garde, Postmodernism as Post-Nationalism by Purdue University Press in 2020. She has worked as a freelance curator and art writer, and from 2000 until 2010, she was the owner of Zemicon Art Gallery in Bridgetown. Our second contributor is Catherine Kennedy, a Barbadian cultural practitioner. She graduated from Lancaster University in the UK and has taken part in exhibitions and residencies locally, regionally, and internationally. Since 2011, she's worked for the Fresh Milk Art Platform in Barbados, where she is currently Director of Programs and has co-managed projects such as the former Caribbean-linked Residency and Exhibition Program and the Transoceanic Visual Exchange Video, Film, and New Media Triennial. Catherine's visual practice is heavily tied to a sense of place, using interplay between organic and inorganic materials and imagery to interrogate the spectrum of belonging and displacement in different environments or cultural contexts. Her writing has appeared in publications such as Caribbean in Transit and Robert and Christopher's publishers A to Z of Caribbean Art. In 2021, Catherine was selected for the CCCADI Afro-Caribbean Art Curatorial Fellowship. She is currently a part-time history and theory tutor in the Division of Fine Arts at Barbados Community College. And our third contributor is Winston Kelman. Born in Barbados in 1981, he received a BA Honours in Fine Art from the Gloucestershire College of Art and Design in Cheltenham in the UK, and a postgraduate diploma in History and Theory of Modern Art from Chelsea College of Art in London in 1990. Mr. Kelman returned to Barbados in 1992. He completed an MA in Cultural Studies at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill in 2014. He has held solo exhibitions at the Garrison Gallery in Barbados, Cadogan Gallery in London, the Barbados Museum, and Zemicon Gallery in Bridgetown, as well as the Morningside Gallery at Barbados Community College. He has also contributed to numerous group exhibitions. Mr. Kelman taught painting and art history at the tertiary level at Barbados Community College from 1999 to 2019, and he currently teaches part-time at that institution. He's a practicing painter with a studio situated in St. Joseph. So I wanted to ask our participants about Alison's contribution to the arts, which was wide-ranging. She's recognized as an accomplished artist, honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award in 2006. She was also a staunch and committed supporter of the art community on a number of fronts. She was a founding vice president of the Art Collection Foundation and a passionate advocate for the establishment of a Barbados Gallery of Art. She was a founding member of AICA Southern Caribbean and had an arts column in the Nation newspaper for many years called Gallery. She was a teacher at St. Michael's School and an inspiration to all who knew and loved her. But perhaps it is her contribution as a landscape painter that is her greatest legacy. Alison arrived in Barbados from the UK, where she was born in 1971 at the age of 29, 5 years after the island achieved its political independence. And the work that we're looking at here is actually a work that she completed before she left the UK. By the mid-1970s, she had established some of the iconic elements of her landscape painting language for which she would become well known. Her images focused largely on the rural landscape, one radically transformed through the process of colonialism and by the predominance of sugar cultivation. So my first question is, was it Alison's intention to present these works as social or political commentary? How are we to read Alison's paintings? Therese, would you like to start us off? doesn't seem to be. Hello? Well, my first thought is that there's nothing intentionally social or political about Alison's work. With the possible exception of her portraits, I don't think she in any way intended her work to be commentary. And I don't even think her work pays deliberate attention to the colonial transformation of the landscape. At best, that's something reflected by default. I think she was a profoundly different artist from someone like Winston, for instance, for whom the landscape is a site of trauma and melancholy and so on. In her later years, and I don't mean to be provocative, but I'm not entirely sure that I would primarily describe her as a landscape painter in the first place. I think, in a certain sense, she reverses the curse of the landscape. And I also think that, what she does is she gives us poetic and imaginative interpretations of the landscape. But rarely they might be titled after specific places, but the landscape and its elements become a catalyst for her exploration of the mystery of nature and representation itself. So I have more to say, but I would like my interlocutors to weigh in.
I'm on, right? That's on? That's on? Yeah. In response to that question, in response to the question as to whether the works were social and political, I don't think so. I think they were mostly sort of topographical kind of readings of the physical landscape, but in many ways descriptive of what was just there. There was a degree of stylization in their practice, which is quite similar to sort of David Hockney's more recent work in his treatment of the landscape. I mean, that's the kind of observation that I've made in terms of style. The content, I think, I did have an image of Lastly in the Country, which is one of her early works. The only one that was this one, represented in the definitive text on Caribbean art by Verde, as to Barbadian landscape painters. And a bit closer, okay. And it actually shows a plantation in it, but it's not named as a plantation. The title suggests a more personal visit to the countryside. So clearly the island is seen as divided into countryside and the town. So it doesn't actually have a political or social dimension to it. It's just a description. And the architecture, the plantation, the colonial sort of imprint of the plantation as structure is just seen as another part of the kind of design, we say, rather than as having any deeper meaning. I know there are alternative readings of this particular image from the artist himself, but that's not kind of relevant question at the moment. We could perhaps talk about that.
Catherine, what do you think?
Oh, thank you. I would agree with both Therese and Winston, and especially having worked with Alison on her retrospective exhibition in 2023. I think that her works were much more intensely personal than they were intended to be social commentary. However, at the same time, I think it's impossible to have such a profound relationship with the landscape without those themes emerging. And as we mentioned, there were some titles in her work. I believe there was one that was called Plantation Door, Claybury. There's a lot of associations to the plantation history and colonialism that we have in Barbados. And I think that was going to emerge, but it was not her primary focus. What I do think is interesting, though, when we think about Alison's overall practice, if we think about her intense keeping of notebooks over the years, I think that in a way is its own kind of historical record of what was happening in Barbados, what was happening with the plantation, how it would have reflected in the landscape. So even though I absolutely believe that she had a very kind of personal relationship that had a lot more to do with play when it came with the landscape than it was about looking at the history in that way. I think that, the multiple readings are what keeps it interesting for the general public and for those who are looking for a more historical kind of reading of her work.
I wanted to ask our panelists what impact they felt Alison's work had on the wider art community in Barbados. Winston, would you like to start us off as a landscape painter?
I think she almost defined what landscape should look like for a lot of artists who were looking for influence, should we say. And I think principle one and the configuration of the royal palms dominating the composition, and then the landscape fanning out in the background. If you have, that one, this one here, yeah. So it's kind of, some people see it as recognizable imagery in terms of what Barbados landscape looks like, but it's just a kind of very particular formulation that she used, which I think helped to inform other people's images as well.
Therese, what do you think?
I think that Alison, I agree that she was an influence on someone like Anne Dodson, certainly. Indirectly, she was an influence on Stanley Graves and he on her. I mean, they were, of course, talking to each other daily for a long time. But other people have also cited Alison as an influence, people like Natalie Hines. Surprisingly, I remember in his very early days, Ewan Atkinson once referring to Alison as someone who, her textured works and incorporation of material and so on. But I've been thinking about, I've wondered, is there any other landscape painter in the Caribbean that I can think of that she resembles? And the answer is no. I think she was so unique in her approach to the landscape. Not James Boodoo, not Ron Savory, not Sybil Attic, not John Dunkley. I mean, her approach was really unusual. And I would like for us to try and tease out a little bit about what it was that was so different about her work. And so I think that there are certain tensions that play out her work repeatedly, although with a different weighting throughout her career. But there's this, as you beautifully wrote in your catalogue for her celebration, many of them have this cosmic heartbeat and vibration. And I think those are perhaps the most appealing ones. I mean, the thing about her work is that it works. It works in the level of that you can describe as affective, not effective, affective, which is a kind of pre-emotional, pre-intellectual level of the psyche. So there's that. And then there's another type of work where, everything seems to be carved up in an almost brutal way. I'm glad you have Revolving by Moonshine, because that I have always felt particularly intrigued and a little challenged by that work. Because, she has this tendency to pull you in and then block your view, and then push you back out. So you kind of find yourself bounced around between foreground and background, also challenged to decide what's the central event here. And there's a tendency also, I think, to, the word relational is a real sort of buzzword nowadays, and all paintings are obviously relational, but hers are orchestrated relationality, where all things are in a kind of relationship to other things, sometimes in symmetries and sometimes in symmetries that evolve. And this is an example of the the sun and the moon as opposites, but then they also become realistic. The beyond the horizon and below the horizon, earth and sea, where these are kind of oppositions that then kind of get integrated. So the oppositions no longer register as oppositions. But again, this business about, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I sometimes think that the way she uses the high horizon in some works to block the view, I mean, this idea of barring us from access in some psychological way echoes her own experience as she became increasingly immobile. That might be a little too speculative, but anyway, so let me hand over to who wants to.
Sure, thank you, Therese. No, I agree. I think her influence on how we view the landscape in the art community, like, it cannot be overstated. And as you've both said, this idea of a signature style, even as she did things that were more abstracted or more representational, it was always unmistakable when you see an Alison Chapman Andrews piece. And I agree with Therese about Revolving by Moonshine as well. It's one of my favorites, and along with the cosmic kind of works that she has done, it starts to introduce this level of ethereality into the landscape that, you don't see a lot of landscape painters capturing in the way that she did. So, I mean, I think that it's hard to quantify what she's done for landscape painting and for the Barbadian art community, but also from the sense of a social landscape. As you mentioned, Alison was at every opening. Alison was constantly engaging with her community, and I think that kind of impact also affected artists in Barbados in ways that might not be tangible, but it's something that we do see reflected in their work. She collected art from a lot of Barbadian artists, and then so there really was this back and forth, this conversation between her practice and the wider art community that was a very special relationship, I think.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I mean, this is an artist who was active on the scene from the 70s. We're looking at a career that spanned 50 years. So there are, sort of literally generations of artists who came through, and this was work that was, she always submitted to group exhibitions. The work was always out there, in addition to her role as a teacher. But I think she also spoke, and in the book that we'll be launching later today, she speaks about the impact that other artists had on her. She was always looking, always absorbing, always rethinking. And you're right, it really was this kind of give and take with the community. Winston, you had asked me to include some other images. Do you want to look at those now?
We could do, yeah. And it's to do with influences on the artist. Because she was trained in Britain, a very formal kind of training.
At the Royal College.
At the Royal College. There would obviously have been influences, in a way, in terms of art history. And I found in particularly the paintings of the Gully, that series actually moved away from the description, general descriptions, to a more condensed space of the Gully. I found that, for me, that answers question number about which is my favorite painting. And it's really the same, Revolving by Moonshine, for that very reason. In that, the landscape then took on a different kind of significance. And it's in the kind of tradition of this one here, which is Samuel Palmer, a British painter, where the natural elements, the landscape becomes this kind of spiritual focus for a lot of the work. And I found that in those, this was the thing that really appealed to me, the fact that the landscape could hold such a kind of mystical, spiritual significance outside of its obvious description. There was another, this is the English side, there was another Paul Nash image that I have, which I thought this one, again, the same elements, the moon, the landscape, the whole of nature is elevated to that kind of mysticism, based on the elements to be found there. And I think for me, that is actually her greatest achievement, how she could take the Barbadian landscape and invest it with this kind of meaning. Why do I say that? Because, again, the landscape doesn't always throw up those types of things, and to find that and to concentrate on that, I think is quite special. This is the Caribbean side of things, where the landscape lambs, with the bamboo and the sugarcane featuring in very significant ways, again with a kind of spiritual focus. And the other one I had was the John Dunkley, where the banana plantation again, and it's on, he conjures up a kind of a spirituality there too. So I think that's the kind of territory that she inhabited with the gully paintings, almost like a synthesis of those two, the Caribbean side of imagery and the English side of imagery, the sensitivity. Because after all, I think her influences were, like most people who've had dominant influences from either side, were synthesized in her gully paintings.
Thank you.
There's one other thing too. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Therese, mentioned the idea of figuration and abstraction. And it's something that I've always admired about Alison, was her ability to move from figuration to abstraction, almost without losing any of the intensity of the paint. And for a painter, that's a considerable achievement, I think, which is sometimes overlooked, when people try to position it in one category or another.
Well, that was the next thing that I wanted to move on to. I noted that over the 5 decades of her career, there had been a number of significant shifts, and I'd ask you to think about what for you was the most significant one that happened. Therese, I was intrigued by the fact that you thought that maybe we shouldn't think of Alison as primarily a landscape painter.
Well, obviously her lack of mobility conditioned her work in the last few decades. And it's clear that in her early works, although sadly there's no real comprehensive catalogue of her early works available to the public, but there is a tendency to create panoramic landscapes of openness, sweeping scenes of the East Coast, a last day in the country, and so on, where this idea that I talked about ad nauseum, about putting a blockage in your way, seems to emerge later on in the oeuvre. So I think that from the open to the closed is a very generalized way of talking about that. But there's also, I think, I mean, I remember coming to her studio numerous times thinking, I'm sorry to admit, but I'm thinking, yeah, her grasp of the line and precision is weakening now. And then she produces something that is on point. And I thought, what's going on here? And I think I came to the conclusion that she actually just has to have the thing in front of her. So her portraits, for instance, are incredibly precise, and her control of the paintbrush is magnificent, even to the very end. But obviously the fact that the landscapes became increasingly imagined. And I just wanted to say for myself, and I'm curious to hear your own version of this, but when I travel through the Barbadian landscape, I don't actually ever feel like I'm in an Alison Chapman Andrews painting. There's too much noise cancelling in her work for that to be the case. But when I'm away from Barbados and I remember the island, it's her Barbados that I remember and that calls me back. I don't know if you have any similar experience about it.
That's interesting because she's usually quite, I mean, I think she has talked about particular works and they are constructions of different experiences that she has put together. And you do get that sense in many of her works. There's, this architectonic aspect to the putting together of the images. But she also was very much attached to places. And I think that the show that we did at Community College of her work, she was, really wanted to show returning to a particular place a decade later and how that had changed. So I think it was a combination of the two. Some of them are very intimate portraits of her backyard, or sort of the steps leading up to her house, very specific. But others very much are this construction of experiences. Catherine, did you have any thoughts about sort of the major shifts in her work?
I mean, I think what Therese just said was very interesting in relation to a quote from Alison, where she said that because she has kind of done these composite views of the landscape, she actually said, you cannot visit some of these places, which is interesting, especially as they are named for these specific locations on the island. And I think that what you've just said about this kind of idea of memory, nostalgia, and just the vibrations or the love of a place that comes through in a way that you don't feel as you're going through everyday life is something that's very special in her works. And I know that Pittstream, County Durham, for example, she described that as this, I think it was one of her earliest and first landscapes. And in her retrospective, we looked at that directly next to what was at her time her most recent landscape of very much abstracted the centrality of things. And, looking at these two works together, I struggle to, in some ways I struggle to make the connection, but then in others you can see this kind of love of color, this experimentation with shape, the slightly abstracted forms. So I think for me, her shifts have always, even when they seem to be jarring or very, very different in how she presented the works, there was always this thread of curiosity, play, experimentation. And again, I come back to the notebooks with that, where she was constantly going back and forth between the abstract, the representational, but she was always recording these things and always kind of growing from it right until the very end of her career. And I think it's hard to pinpoint one shift because there were just so many beautiful, nuanced approaches in her work.
Winston, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, that's covered it quite well.
All right. So I asked each of our panelists to choose their favorite work and to tell us why it was their favorite work. Winston, would you like to go first?
Well, it was the one that I think we all agreed on, which was the Revolving by Moonshine. It's very deep, it's very mystical, it demonstrates all the qualities of good painting, and it also has an atmosphere. And for a painter, I think that's a tremendous achievement.
Catherine, you chose this, right?
I did, and I mean, this was an impossible question, Alison, selecting just the one. But I chose this one specifically for a couple of reasons. So I had a personal experience with this piece while I was curating, where it was included in the show. I had the dimensions of it, and I thought, yes, I know exactly where this is going on the wall. It's in Anne Dodson's personal collection. I showed up, and it's about 10 inches of extra frame on this piece, and I thought this piece is more frame than art, so I was actually very frustrated, and I had to change the position of the work in the show. But interestingly, then this piece, because of the presence it had in that exhibition, it became the backdrop of so many images of people speaking at this exhibition, people posing in front of it. And so I kind of had this, this interesting relationship with the piece that I hadn't expected to have with this particular piece, because although I love it and it's beautiful, I hadn't expected to have this back and forth feeling about it. But also, I want to make note of the title of this artwork, Be Strong and Endure, because that also, I think, spoke to me, and that really speaks to Alison as a person and as an artist, you know, and this, the incredible tenacity and dedication that she showed to her work. So, and I see the title, Be Strong and Endure, and I think about what she, you know, went through personally and artistically. I think this piece really transformed for me.
I think also one of the things that's interesting that we haven't mentioned, that she sort of the changes that evolved in her work was the introduction of collage and the way in which she starts to experiment a lot with media. And here she actually used textiles, I think, that she'd got from Stella Hackett, that she uses on the textures of the trees.
I think she spoke like machine knitting, then yeah, entering into the work in this piece.
Yeah. Therese.
I mean, there are literally very few artists whose work make me feel drunk when I look at them for a long time. I'm completely, you know, animated by them. So all the favorites, in fact, all the examples you've shown are among my favorites too, and I'm not monogamous when it comes to favorites. So I now live with this piece, which originally, when I first saw it, I thought I need to learn to like this piece. And now that I live with it, I am completely engrossed in it. I see I mean, every element is a chapter unto itself. And I mean, at first I thought it was a very reserved and stark piece, but it is so generous. But I mean, I just want to add, to say that there are so many that could be favorites. Easter Sweet Bottom is it's so audacious. Do you have it as I do, I think you, yeah,
Yes,
no,
you had it.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, it's full of cane trash in the foreground, yeah. Oh. There it is. Right. So, I mean, only Alison can get away with doing that. She shoves all that cane trash in your face before you get to the nice green vegetation in the background. I remember Sarah Venables once pointing out that, or maybe it was Denise Minard-Greenwich, who said, only Alison can get away with putting a palm tree right smack in the center of the composition. And it works. You know, she breaks so many rules. There's no way she doesn't gently guide your view into the background. She blocks your way all the way. And yet she strings you along. So, but I'm compelled to ask you, Alison, what's your favorite?
Well, what I want to say is I'm a little disappointed that nobody felt that there was any political commentary in Alison's work. I was really hoping that we could, and it wasn't so, I mean, I realized that she never articulated that I know of. But it was more of a broader question of, is that something that we can bring to the reading of her work? Given the time that she arrived, given that it was such a different landscape for her when she did arrive, that she then had to develop this relationship with. And given what seems to be so much in front of our eyes, as you said, you've got all of this cut cane right here at the front, you've got the chattel house in the midst of this sort of more lush vegetation, and then this sort of distant horizon, which is a format that she repeated a number of times with the cultivated fields surrounding, and then this kind of more indigenous, lush, womb-like center of vegetation in the middle. And then, of course, the royal palms, which are probably the most repeated element within her work. And if you're not going to go down this road with me about the political reading of her work, can we talk about the palm trees, the royal palm, and why that is such an iconic image for her?
I would just say, I think that if, if we were to have the conversation with Alison, she would definitely put that on us. She would tell us, to read those kinds of political and historical and social things, they're absolutely present. And I think the fact that, you've highlighted this is something that we have to come to her work and bring. I don't know that she would ever articulate it herself, as you said, but it is inherent. It's inherent whenever we look at things like the landscape, whenever we look at the royal palm. I think it was one of the first images that really struck her, as you said, when she moved to Barbados. And this repetition of it, the way she has positioned royal palms along plantation lines, and we all know what that signified historically. I don't think that there's any getting away from that, for sure. I think that what we've all articulated is that Alison would absolutely never have said it herself.
She wouldn't have said it. Yeah.
Therese, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I don't want to add anything about the palm trees, except that I find it interesting that we very often only see a segment of them. Very rarely do we see the whole trunk. But what I do want to say something is about her, which we haven't really talked about, her own presence in the work, which is so discreet, and the many, many different perspectives that she conjoins. There is no location from which you can see these things. They are very much composite perspectives. And she is the medium that brings it all together. And yet it is never about her. It is about the way we see, it's about things that we perceive in nature and so on. But I think that the discussion about human perception and how do we frame what we see and perceive, at this point in time historically, is a political thing. We live in times that are becoming more and more palpably post-humanist. And the centrality of human perception and our visual apparatus is an insistence on the importance and the value of what we are about as human beings. No AI could do what she does. And so the political aspect is in painting and continuing to do that.
Yeah, I would like to just sort of reaffirm what you've said. When Alison first found out that she had MS, I was surprised by this. She stopped painting. There were a number of years when Alison did not make work. And it was a conscious decision to go back to that process. And once she did, she was, so invested in it. But it's very much, as Catherine said, this idea of be strong and endure was very much Alison's story. We have just a few more minutes. I was wondering if there's anything else that any of you wanted to add that we have not brought up yet.
I wanted to ask you, why was she not included in the recent drives for Barbadian art, Caribbean art, when we talked about the last 20 years of promotion of art in Barbados? Was it because painting is still seen as a kind of, it doesn't fit in so well with the contemporary idea, but she wasn't included in any of those major exhibitions that we had. The Diaspora exhibition from the National Art Gallery. And I just wondered why she wasn't.
Can you be specific which ones you're saying that she was not included in?
The 10-year project with the Diaspora Visual Arts exhibition. As the most significant Barbadian painter, or a painter, or is that a legitimate question to ask?
Yeah, I think in terms of the Black Diaspora Visual Arts, there was the first exhibition that was curated by David, and that was through submission, and I'm not sure why she didn't make a proposal, but it was just based on the proposals. And then I think subsequently there was an exhibition at Queen's Park that Therese, you curated as part of, and was Allison in that show?
The three moments?
Yeah, the three generations.
The three
I think
generations.
she was, I think
Yeah.
she was. But I
It
believe
was
she was.
about 15,
Because she
10
was
10
interviewed
years
in the
ago.
catalogue.
Right.
She was
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
Right,
yeah.
right. It's interesting that you have that perception. I don't have the perception that she was absent at a certain point. Certainly a lot of it was her own doing. The one big painting exhibition for her 80th birthday was totally her instigation, the catalog. But that was really Allison from the beginning. I can remember her telling me when she first arrived and she would organize shows and nobody would review them. She would write reviews and submit them to the newspaper anonymously. You know, she was just going to do whatever was required. And I think that impulse never left. Yeah.
I would just add to that as well. When I was approached to work with her on one big painting, I think I had to change my idea of myself as a curator in that very quickly, because I spoke with her, I was like, oh, but you've curated this show. You know exactly how you want to be represented. And it was my job then to support her in that, and of course give my input. But it really, I think that this idea of being strong and enduring, and this idea that we have had to do so much of the work ourselves in Barbados, as Barbadian artists, the advocating, the curating, the agitating for recognition. And, I think by the time we got to one big painting, that was so embedded in Alison and who she was. And I am honored to have been able to support her in that. But, that was absolutely a collaboration. And I would never say to anybody, I curated this show. I feel like I'm just proud to have supported her in how she wanted her legacy to be shown in that show.
Yeah, the same thing with the show that we did at the Barbados Community College. She had this vision of what she wanted it to be, and you had to accept those terms if you were going to work with Alison. And I will say, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting in that what we watched later on today is 100%. She produced the entire sets. This is her vision, and it's really glad that we're able to help. All right, I think we're going to wrap up. I want to thank our panelists very much for their contribution today, and we can turn it over to the conversation too.
Thank you very much, Alison, and for you guests. Very noticeable in this presentation was the absence of us. With any meeting like this, we would have very careful presence. So thank you very much for that reveal the work and tributes to For our second conversation, I will invite Sandra Cummins and her guests to take the stage. And during that time, you'll need to stretch and stand, help yourself to some water at the back. Move closer to the center of the room where the fans are directed to, whatever you need to tell them.
Hello. Welcome back. Next conversation. I very much appreciated the first one having the opportunity to hear the kind of dialogue that developed. I have the honor of welcoming our three guests, and I want to talk to you very briefly about the three of them. I want to mention first very briefly. She's not a stranger to Barbados and to many of you, but because I have another level, I'm grateful for that. Larry Query is an art historian and museum professional specialized in art and culture from the Americas. She was educated at the University of Ghent, Belgium, in art history at Emory University of London, with a PhD in art history, museum studies, and culture studies. Her past professional associations include the National Gallery of Jamaica, where she served as executive director from 2009 to 2018, and previously before that period as curator. And at the Edinburgh College of the Visual and Performing Arts, where she lectured until 2023. In November 2024, she became the director of the Cayman Islands National Museum. Her many publications on Caribbean art and culture include the Caribbean Art, World of Art, Phantom House in 1998, which was published in 2020. I now wish to welcome on my left, Senior Probably I told you that I was the leader of one of this. I have very limited time, but it's a special honor and pleasure to welcome me. He is from Havana, is a Cuban art historian, creator, academic, and professor. Internationally recognized for his career in promotion and analysis of contemporary art. He holds a degree in art history from the University of Havana and currently serves as director of the National Museum of Fine Art. Special thanks for me to have visited this museum. He previously served as the director of the Landsc Center of Contemporary Art and the Havana Biennale, which many of you will be well aware. He is a professor of theoretical art studies at the Higher Institution of Art in Cuba and has led major cultural projects of significant national and international relevance. He's created numerous exhibitions in Cuba and abroad, showcasing Cuban and Latin American artists in prestigious biennales and museums. His work as a critic, lecturer, and juror of important art prizes has significantly contributed to the global dialogue on contemporary practices. And he has been awarded honors such as the Order of Arts and Letters, Chevalier of France, and Order of the Star of Britain. His academic work reflects a commitment into disseminating innovation and the creation of a space for cultural mediation and consolidating tradition and the central figure in Cuban art and its international projection. So while you might not have known him personally, you will have known his work. I'd like finally to interview the first member of the body. Maya is a professional, a cultural professional interested in the world of arts. Student programming, storytelling, and events in education, public outreach, and enlightenment of community. She's education manager at the National Gallery of Cayman Islands, where her work supports community engagement with the NGCI's visual arts collection, exhibitions, and initiatives, in the development, implementation, and evaluation of public programs and resources. The two holds an MA with distinction in cultural and creative industry, from King's College London and a BA Honors in History from the University of Toronto. She participated in the Museums Association of the Caribbean's annual conference as a presenter in 2022 and 2023, and as a member of the Global Selection Subcommittee in 2024. She co-facilitated a youth workshop exploring the intersection of museums and sustainability at the Uniform Transnational Island Museologists Conference at St. Andrews in Scotland. She's contributed to the Outcome Land focus group on Caribbean museums and has been involved in a range of cultural projects locally and regionally through her work with both public and private organizations as a writer, an educator, and event program coordinator. Nikki was an exhibiting artist in the third Cayman Islands Millennium, Conversations with the Past in the Present, and is the recipient of the Heritage Trust Award, mid-career, at the Cayman National Cultural Foundation 2023 National Arts and Cultural Awards. So we have a very interesting and lively lineup, ladies and gentlemen, and I think you already have a sense of where this conversation may go. I particularly want to note that in this instance, we're talking about not just the artwork that's in the collection, but we're talking about basically the spaces that contribute to art knowledge, art education, art cultivation, if you like, in the Caribbean. In these turbulent and unruly times, such as ours, it calls, in a sense, for bespoke measures to activate and circulate lessons in Caribbean history and culture. In that spirit, we want to explore these complexities in the context of both museums and national galleries as moderator, as maker, or as motor of this kind of action. Because we have now seen how physical as well as virtual spaces have become increasingly clear and complex as we emphasize or humiliate subject matters with borderline conflicts in terms of community or indeed in terms of collaboration. So I want to sort of set a regarding tone for looking in first at my first questions, each of you, and to know that each of your institutions has had a different journey from long-standing national institutions, relatively young galleries. Could you start by sharing how your institution finds its role in shaping the national identity of art in the Caribbean? And as an addition to that, as an addendum to that, what is the sort of national need in the context of Caribbean galleries and museums, especially given our diverse and diverse work communities? And I will turn first, so I turn to you first, Lovely, for your initial thoughts on the subject. Our guest has an interpreter, so please be patient.
Y bueno, casualmente ahora no fue intencional. Acabo de llegar al tratado.
First of all, I would like to thank you for this invitation. It was intentional, but there was an exhibition in the museum in 2019.
Se llama La posibilidad de
The infinite possibilities of
la parodia de una frase de José Martí.
it was a parody of the phrase by Jose Marti.
Y a partir de ahí, en esas posiciones, nosotros hicimos un poco violentar, cambiar la estructura tradicional.
And based on those exhibitions, we wanted to totally transform the landscape of the museum in our country.
Cuidado con lo únicamente.
Moving from a museum which is chronologically structured in time.
La idea es un poco transversalizarlo,
And the idea was to make it more transversal,
tomar determinados ejes temáticos
to deal with specific themes,
para poner a dialogar artistas de diferentes generaciones.
so that we could set going a debate, a discussion among artists from various generations.
Nosotros, realmente, si algo ha producido Cuba mucho más que la producción musical, con la producción de artistas. Pagando que la producción musical, todo está.
The creation of artists has been a major achievement of Cuba. We have many great Cuban artists.
Entonces, los más jóvenes se quejan que están representados.
And many of the young people complain that they're not represented in the art, in the elements.
Son los que va desde la colonia hasta la década de los 90 del pasado siglo.
And because the museum's focus on the years going from colonialism to the 1970s.
Es lo que se exhibe en sala.
And this is what we see in the exhibition groups.
Porque, aclarar una cosa, para ir directo a la pregunta, tenemos un edificio que tiene toda la historia del arte cubano y otro que está por exhibir.
Because we want to give you a little bit of the context of our building, our museum. We have a building that deals with Cuban art, and the one that focuses on international art.
En esta idea de cómo se crea desde el arte, un relato de los
And this time when we're always talking about the story around the art.
pensando en uno de los grandes escritores, Juan
We were thinking about one of the great Cuban writers,
Severo Sarduy.
Cerebro
Sarduy
Sarduy.
decía que la nación era algo que estaba por venir, es una imagen de venir.
He said that the nation is something that's realized the future is a futuristic idea.
Más una nación tan joven,
And even more so a nation that is young as Cuba.
que se han mezclado tantas etnias, razas,
Which is a big boy, they call it so many races and ethnicities.
solamente de África llegaron más de 80 años.
And from Africa alone, there were more than 80 ethnic groups.
La migración china es muy importante.
There was a massive immigration from China.
Después, con la evolución de la esclavitud, el desarrollo de la república, vino también mano de obra, hay migración, hay tierras,
And after slavery ended, there was immigration from other Caribbean countries such as Jamaica and Haiti.
por supuesto, la presencia de
And of course, presence of Spanish.
América.
So this was a massive combination
Por
of
eso nosotros no podemos hablar en términos de una raza tradicional.
So we cannot speak of a single traditional race.
José Martín podría decir una,
Jose Martin preferred to talk about the natural.
polemizando con Vasconcelos, hablaba de esa raza cómica.
And he created a bit of controversy by using that term.
A partir de ahí, bueno, cómo se construye lo complejo que es superponer tanta cultura.
And then it became complicated to superimpose so many different cultures at the same time.
Fernando Pic creó el concepto de transculturación.
Fernando
Ortiz,
Ortiz created the idea of transculturalism.
pero él mismo decía que la transculturación no se trata de una fusión donde todo se une para desaparecer lo otro.
And he said it's not a matter of bringing everything together to make individual parts disappear.
Son interrelaciones.
There are interlinked.
Y lo comparaba con la doctrina, bueno, que es la
He compared it to a typical Cuban dish called carpaccio.
una versión de ese estilo. Algunos vegetales, hierbas, son suaves, pero otros hacen los frutos, tienen dulce.
when you put the fish, some of the vegetables, the seed cream in the pot, another seed to the bottom, and you can turn it. In Cuba, therefore, this, you know what? But you wouldn't go to the second restaurant and bring this in New York.
Yeah, this audio and
When we examine the issues of race,
Trabajó con la curadora de esa exposición específicamente, que hablo del año del colegio.
my colleague mentioned that issue of Blue William.
Tina de Azúcar, fue la curadora,
And then the issue of sugar, which is not curated focused on.
es ver, I think it's the same thing. Las plantaciones mazareras, y solo como algo puramente. I think it's the same thing.
And the sugar plantation serves not just as an economic system, but also as a cultural issue,
Es el desmontó en el ciclo del imperio.
which was dismantled at the beginning of 2000s.
Bueno, puede ser esa, de economía.
yeah, this audio and
Cuba then diversified from the sugar-based economy to services,
Y eso tuvo un impacto cultural.
and this had a cultural effect.
Después trabajamos la historia, cómo se ha visto la historia a través del arte de Cuba de Cuba.
And then we looked at how the history of Cuba could be examined through its art.
Y después yo creé una exposición que le puse el espejo de los enigmas, apuntes sobre la humanidad.
And then I curated an exhibition which is called the Mirror of
El espejo de los enigmas,
the Mirror of the Enigmas.
apuntes sobre la humanidad.
Looks at Cuban identity.
Y era un homenaje también a Ortiz.
And it was also a homage that I paid to Ortiz.
Los componentes de la nación cubana se cuestionaban qué cosa es el cubano.
He always asks himself, he always asks himself, what is Cuban identity?
Él decía, no, hay una relación íntima.
all right, I'm gonna put this one.
Talks about the cigars that we smoke, the beans that we eat, all of those things, but Cuban identity is not just that.
Y esa idea de cómo el cubano también se ha ido mezclando.
And how the idea of the idea of how Cubans were making the rest of the world.
Cuestionar también con esa exposición los conceptos de ver la identidad de nuestro sociedad. La identidad, cuestionar la identidad, no verla como algo observado.
So we look at identity not just as something close to love.
La identidad es como la obra de arte,
Identity is like an art work.
es un proceso abierto.
It's an open process. Okay,
Esa era la idea.
that's the idea.
So I turn now to Maya. And Maya, as an educator and a scientist, I would really like to hear about the way in which your work has contributed about this very young institution and how it has evolved in its own national about this national meeting in that context.
Yeah, so the National Gallery Reimagining
perhaps a little bit of a unique example because we actually weren't built off of the back of a donated collection. So many museums around the world have grown from the private collections of individuals, right? The National Gallery of the Cayman Islands actually started as really an education program. And so it continues to be foundational to what we do. I think the important thing for us is flexibility and understanding, as Jorge said, this concept of identity in the nation is something that is constantly changing and is very relational, particularly for Cayman. Cayman's growth and development has been so much informed by our relationship with the countries around us. Seafarers in Cayman built this economy through relationships with Nicaragua and with Cuba, with Jamaica, with Honduras. And we continue to have many, many nationalities represented in Cayman today. So with approximately 75,000 people across an archipelago of 3 islands, totaling about 100 square miles, we have 130 nationalities represented. So it is a very diverse public. And so we're constantly being informed by different cultures, different nationalities, and everything that they bring with them. So it's constantly this flexible sort of scenario. I think with education and with the role that that plays in our institution, that flexibility is a really key part of what we do in terms of being responsive to our community. So we really try not to be, I guess, too concrete in every single thing that we do. Concrete may be the wrong word, but we don't stick to one thing and sit in it for a very long time. It's about being responsive to what the community needs from us at any given time so that we can really have a service to our broader community.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I turn to you, Verla, and you also have had a role to play in Cayman Islands as well as Jamaica and have had conversations with many of us in the region. But perhaps you can talk from the standpoint of your National Museum, how it has developed, how it has evolved. Is it significantly different from the Cayman Islands National Gallery? And indeed, based on your long experience, what does that term national really mean in terms of Caribbean galleries and museums, especially for our diverse and diasporic communities?
Thank you, Alessandra. And first of all, I want to say how delighted I am to be here. 26 years ago, I think I was here for the launch of the National Art Gallery Committee and was also on a panel at that time. So it's really amazing to be back on this occasion. At that time, I was associated with the National Gallery of Jamaica, where I spent most of my career. Now I am the head of the the Cayman Islands National Museum, which is a general museum. So I have made this transition from a National Art Gallery to a general museum with a remit that is very similar to the Barbados Museum. And by the way, we're also located in a heritage structure, so we have a lot in common. The Cayman Islands National Museum opened its doors in 1990, and it is located in a heritage building on the waterfront in Georgetown. It's actually the oldest standing public building in the Cayman Islands. It's a small building, it's a small museum as such at the present time, but with a huge collection of about 12,000 objects, all sorts of things, memorabilia, archaeological finds, natural history specimens, and also a collection of art. Right? And we predate the National Gallery. So the museum started collecting before there was a National Gallery. So that created a different kind of relationship. And the museum also collected art most actively at a moment when certain things were happening in Caymanian art. The Visual Art Society was very active at that time. And then there was the McCoy Prize, which was this annual prize, which was a collaboration with the early National Gallery, actually, from which a lot of works were acquired. So there was this sort of idea of a developmental role. But the museum has a much earlier history, actually, in a private collection. In the private collection collection work of Ira Thompson. And Ira Thompson was a really interesting character. He was a taxi driver, sort of self-styled tour guide, a bird watcher, and all sorts of things. And he collected anything related to Cayman. I mean, from old glasses to passports to found objects to natural history specimens and so on. And he opened this private museum, the Caymanas Museum, in 1959 and ran that for many years as a popular attraction actually in Cayman. And then eventually in 1979, that collection was bought in its entirety by the government of the Cayman Islands. And that became the foundation of the Cayman Islands National Museum. So there is an earlier history there in private collecting and sort of this absolutely amazing sort of cabinet of curiosities that this man put together. Now, Maya already spoke about the complexities of Caymanian identity, and those complexities have deep historical roots, and because almost every family in the Cayman Islands has connections somewhere, whether it is in Jamaica, in Cuba, in Central America, of course also Europe, and so on. So it has always been a very interconnected society with a strong maritime culture. So also the travel that comes with that has also played a role. But then in the last decades, I mean, basically from the 1960s and 70s onwards, the Cayman Islands also became an offshore banking center. And because of that came in a very large expatriate workforce, which actually exceeds the local population at the present time, right? And that has created a lot of dialogue and if we're honest, also tensions around national identity. So this sense of a loss, you know, this sense that Caymanian identity is being lost in the process. And the museum is sort of positioned in a very interesting way in that context, because it's definitely seen as a sort of guardian of Caymanian identity, but it also needs to be open to all, and it needs to be receptive to social and cultural change. So it's sort of torn between those two poles, and that is actually also a political issue in the Cayman Islands. So it's a very, and it was an issue, for instance, in the recent elections in May. So it's very interesting to be in that context. In terms of our art collection, we have continued collecting from time to time after the National Gallery opened, but not as actively as before. But we have a collaborative relationship with the National Gallery. So we work very closely together, actually. So we're not competing with each other at all. And I think for me as an art historian, by training, one of the interesting things is, first of all, I have to force myself not to focus too much on art. So I have to be careful with that to give due attention to everything. But it also allows, working from a general museum allows you to ask different questions. For instance, we're working on an exhibition called The Sea is History, taking our cues from Derek Walcott's famous poem. And that has a collection of objects that came from the sea, that were found on beaches, sometimes by Ira Thompson, that were found by others, objects that were part of maritime archaeological research and so on, and then also images and objects that talk about the sea as a bearer of memory and so on. So one of the nice things about being in the General Museum is that you can have a vintage diving helmet in the same exhibition as an abstract painting, right? So you can really mix it up in a way that does not force you to stay within the realms of art. And that, I think, is perhaps what we can do a little bit different from the National Gallery, right?
Thank you. I very much appreciate the way in which you've introduced very different trajectories of development for each of your institutions. I want to, however, put to you the point that when we talk about art, we really need to be in the context of our institutions talking about visuality. And if we use that term, then we understand that people in visiting museums or art galleries their relationship with the object is based first and foremost on what they see, and therefore how they respond to that. Now, I want to look a little bit at the role of space and architecture and how important it is to have a permanent space for a national gallery or museum in the Caribbean. And does it give credibility and permanence, or does it risk alienating audiences by seeming elitist, because we've had both responses in a number of different scenarios. And then, to what extent should national galleries be repository of collections versus active sites of engagement, education, and dialogue? And here, Maya, I'm looking at you to start us off in this context.
Yeah. I almost feel like the two will never be mutually exclusive.
No.
I think, when you do have a physical museum building, there is a very long legacy of what galleries and museums are and how they function in society. So I think there will always be a perception of them as potentially, places of importance, and also places that potentially limit, are seen as elitist, right? So there may be a certain section of communities that feel uncomfortable in those spaces, potentially for very valid reasons, right? I think our role as national institutions is about accessibility. And I think that comes in some of your questions. A national collection should be for the people of its community, right? So they need to have access to that collection. And I think having a physical space hopefully allows that, right? Of course, it doesn't just end at having a physical space. It also, then you need to make it even more accessible. So that could be, for us at the National Gallery, we're very lucky to have free admission, which is a huge barrier that we're able to cross. We also think about accessibility. You talked about, that visual part of art, but we also have a large section of our community who, may have visual impairment or may not be able to interact with the art on that level. So how do we provide experiences for them where that section of our nation and our community are still able to access their national collection and the stories and the soul that this collection embodies, right? We are very intentional about our accessibility landscape, as it were. So we try to offer tours in different languages, and I know they also do this at the National Museum as well, including audio guides, using QR codes, ensuring that the physical space is accessible for people in wheelchairs or for individuals with various disabilities. Ensuring that we have touch points in education as well. So whether that's a basket of objects that people can use that are more material and tactile, because we're aware that we have learners who learn in many different ways, not just visually. So it's really about, again, that flexibility and being able to pivot your approach to a very, very diverse community.
Thank you. And Verily, perhaps you'd like to continue along these lines, because I think when we open the discussion about whether it needs to be physical space or virtual space, when in fact what we're talking about is accessibility of the art, which is the critical issue for many of our collections in the Caribbean. Do you have thoughts on this point?
Sure. And accessibility at different levels. And I think we're in a heritage structure which poses its own problems in terms of adapting it for physical accessibility. I mean, we have the same problem, there is no elevator and so on. So in terms of physical access, there definitely are boundaries, but there are many other issues of accessibility. And where I would challenge you a little bit is that visuality is very important. Yes. in museums, art and others, but a museum really ought to appeal to all the senses. Yes. Right? And even the oral and so on is very important. I mean, we're talking about a project of bringing some of the soundscapes of the natural environments in the Cayman Islands, the wetlands and so on, into the museum, so that there can also be that kind of experience. So I think access also needs to be at that level. We're also in dialogue with an organization called Inclusion Cayman, and they work primarily with people who are on the autism spectrum, but about having sensory experiences where the sensory experiences are actually reduced, so that another kind of experience of the museum can take place. So I think access it's a very broad spectrum kind of thing that we need to think about. Language is another. I mean, we have Maya mentioned our audio guides. We added to the conventional languages, we added Caymanian dialect. I think it's very important to include the Creole languages of the Caribbean in our remit. We added Jamaican Patois also and Tagalog because Jamaicans and Filipinos are the two largest expatriate groups, the two largest migrant groups in the Cayman Islands. So we just wanted to send a signal, basically, that everybody was welcome and included in the dialogues that we offer.
Thank you very much. And now I turn back to Jorge, and I have to ask Jorge, do you have a sense of whether the issue of credibility and permanence is the key point, or are we talking about accessibility, education, entertainment, almost engagement of the community? How do you perceive this to function through your institution?
Sí, eso que dices es clave, ¿no? Nosotros, por suerte, tenemos un departamento educativo que tiene la edad mía, 60 años.
What you're saying is very key. We have an education department which plays a crucial role.
Y ahora prácticamente la mayoría de los especialistas que tenemos ahí son jóvenes.
And nearly all of the specialists that we have there are young.
Y de diferentes formaciones.
And they're from different groups.
Vienen de la comunicación, de la pedagogía,
They work in communication, teaching,
de la historia del arte,
art history,
y tenemos graduados de arte también.
and we have also other areas.
Por lo tanto, los proyectos no pueden ser proyectos desde el simple planteamiento didáctico,
So the projects that we have are not simply educational, they can't just be educational.
sino cómo llegar a las diferentes comunidades.
That we need to be able to reach the different communities.
Los niños
Children.
que reciben enseñanza especial,
Children who receive special education,
los niños que están en la red de escuelas tradicionales,
children in traditional mainstream schools,
el adulto mayor,
older adults,
los adolescentes.
teens.
Hemos ido creando también un sistema de trabajo para los ciegos y los débiles visuales y también los sordos, ¿no?
We've been working on programs for the visually and hearing impaired.
Y cómo el museo también ha ido llegando al territorio donde está enclavado.
And we've been reaching the more remote areas of the country.
Estamos en el corazón de La Habana Vieja,
We're also in the heart of Old Havana,
donde hay problemas de vivienda, problemas sociales serios,
where there are housing problems and serious social problems.
y cómo el arte tiene esa posibilidad transformadora
And we were looking at the transformative capacity of art
de mejorar espiritualmente a la gente,
to improve people spiritually
de crear también una formación humanista profunda.
and to have a deep humanist training education.
Y así ha sido el trabajo que hemos desarrollado.
And this is the work we've been doing.
De hecho, inclusive muchos proyectos curatoriales y proyectos también vinculados propiamente a la labor de las exposiciones tienen que estar pensados desde las obras de los propios artistas, están pensados en función de la educación.
And many of the programs that we've been working on, we've had to work on them from the perspective of the artists.
Si pensamos que la educación está separada del arte, cometemos un gravísimo error.
If we think that education is separate from art, we're making a serious mistake.
El arte tiene que ser profundamente educativo.
Art must be deeply educational.
Y en ese sentido y sobre esa dinámica es que trabajamos.
And we have to work in that area.
Ahora mismo, recién terminé viniendo para acá, uno de los talleres nuestros estaba dedicado al títere, como expresión del teatro, a los títeres. Los títeres, ¿cómo se dice en inglés? Es el teatro que son los muñecos que la gente crea que lo manipulas con las manos.
Oh, okay. So we've worked on a project with puppetry.
Y es súper interesante porque el títere, que parece una cosa que está alejado de las obras del teatro, se convierte del museo.
And it's interesting because puppetry, which is considered to be part of the area of the theater,
se convirtió en un fenómeno creativo. Fue una manera en que los muchachos que participaron ahí dialogaron con las obras del museo.
it became a creative phenomenon because it allowed the young people who were involved to communicate, to express themselves.
Y nuestro departamento educacional ha pensado mucho en esa idea de sentir el arte, no mostrarlo, sino que la gente lo sienta.
And therefore, our Department of Education wanted to focus on feeling art rather than just seeing it.
Y a partir de las obras, los muchachos empezaron a expresar los subtíteres a partir de historias personales que conectaban con las obras del museo.
And based on that experience, the young people started to connect the puppetry with their own experiences that they had and their own perception of the museum.
Y fue una experiencia profundamente conmovedora.
And it was a very moving experience.
Creo que fue una catarsis colectiva.
And I think it was like a collective
Y una
transformative
manera de descubrirse a ellos mismos.
and it helped us to discover our own selves.
Y los resultados siempre los terminan en exposición que pueden, como les damos el mismo valor, la misma importancia que la exposición de cualquier artista de relevancia en el museo.
And we want to give that kind of activity the same importance, the same relevance as any other activities that we will be
Y
doing.
esa
in the
tiene
museum.
que ser la experiencia. Para nosotros es una prioridad dentro del museo.
And this has to be our experience as a national entity.
I'm grateful to you for bringing in the notion of puppetry and, in a sense, really the notion of performance as a foundational and educative experience within the context of the National Museum. I want to tell you, I have to confess, I'm being a little bit unfair to you all because each of the speakers did in fact prepare wonderful PowerPoint exhibitions showing art. But I wanted to hear their voices, so excuse me for continuing the conversation. I wanted to talk a little bit about collections, representation, and identity, and Vera, I'm coming to you first. And to ask, how should national galleries balance showcasing national art with recognized broader Caribbean and diasporic connections? And how can national galleries counter exoticization and simplistic narratives of the Caribbean and instead present more complex and authentic perspectives? So over to you, Vera.
Well, I always think that museums, art galleries, and so on need to ask questions rather than to provide answers, right? And I think leaving and that very important notion of the danger of a single narrative, I think that is something that really needs to be at the center of what we do. I mean, how can we open the conversation about national identity and so on, rather than to close it off, right? I mean, how can we add to it? How can we add new voices to it? Because one of the issues, for instance, that I work with a lot of Generation Z staff members. Well, it's a very small staff, so perhaps I shouldn't use the term a lot, but my staff is mostly Generation Z. They have very different conceptions of identity than the generation that is dominant in museum management, So it's very important to bring their perceptions of who they are and what they stand for into the picture, So it is really, I think the main thing with identity is that it always needs to be seen as a dynamic, open-ended, conflicted kind of thing. And I think one of the roles of a museum art gallery is really to be a forum for those kind of dialogues to take place. Right? So I hope that answers it.
I think that does a good job of bringing it into focus. Jorge, what are your thoughts in terms of this? How can national galleries counter exoticization? And exoticization, how can they counter it? Exoticization and simplistic narratives of the Caribbean, which can be a hazard for many of us in the Caribbean. We are invited into various dialogues and various exhibitions and projects, but often it's looking at through a very specific lens. How can the National Museum counter those kinds of situations and ensure that we have more authentic Caribbean perspectives being grounded in the kind of work that we do?
Esa es una pregunta compleja de
It's a
responder,
very
¿no?
complex question.
Pero te lo digo por el propio Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes de Cuba.
The community of the Museum of Fine Arts in Cuba
Es que surgió en 1913
was established in 1913,
y nuestros coleccionistas
and our collectors
estaban mirando mucho a Europa, ¿no?
were looking very much to Europe.
Y las colecciones que hay, bueno, tenemos en arte internacional. Realmente el edificio se llama Arte Universal.
And the building that houses the international collection is
Esto
called
va
the
a ser-
Universal Building.
Esto va a ser un debate con los curadores. Aquí está la jefa del departamento de curaduría.
And this has
Porque
been a debate that we've had with the curators.
seguirle llamando Arte Universal me parece un problema.
Because for me, it's problematic to continue calling it a universal.
Como decía Enrique Dussel, ¿no? Lo universal es lo único, ¿no? La mirada de Europa. Realmente yo decía Dussel, es mejor hablar de lo pluriversal.
For me, it would be better to talk about the pluriversal perspective rather than universal perspective.
Y hacer una mirada pluriversal.
We need to have a pluriversal perspective.
Y todo esto yo creo que hay que generar un pensamiento desde nuestra región.
And we need to bring in our own perspective.
Y el museo nuestro todavía, en sus colecciones internacionales, tiene una puesta en escena profundamente colonizadora, ¿no? Nuestro museo, en nuestras colecciones internacionales, hay todavía una puesta en escena colonizadora, ¿no?
And we've had a bit of a colonizing slant
Esa es la realidad.
in our international museum. in
Ahora,
our
¿cómo
exhibitions.
replantearte todo eso? Es el gran desafío.
How do we reframe that? That's a major challenge.
De hecho, bueno, para mí fue muy importante haber pasado por la Bienal de La Habana primero,
And for me, it was important to look at Havana first of
porque
all,
soy profesor del Art Institute en Cuba,
because I'm a teacher, a professor at the institute in
pero
Cuba.
prácticamente la asignatura que yo doy se basa en el arte occidental.
But the subject I'm teaching is focused on Western
Porque
art.
después está gente que da arte africano, arte asiático, arte del Caribe,
And we've integrated African, Caribbean art.
entonces
Asian
arte
art.
latinoamericano. Es simpático porque colegas, profesoras, amigos míos, cuando yo pongo un ejemplo de un artista del Caribe en mi clase, como pongo a Helio Tichica o a Helio Tichica, cuando pongo un ejemplo de un artista latinoamericano,
When I give the example of a Latin American artist,
o en mi clase le dice la profesora a esta colega amiga, oye, estás poniendo artistas latinoamericanos y lo tuyo es el arte occidental.
and my
Ya me
colleague,
dijeron los muchachos que le pusiste una película de Helio Tichica. Como que esa manera de enseñar el arte compartimentado.
we have this tendency to look at art in a compartmentalized way.
Entonces, es la gran, hay que establecer una ruptura con esas cosas.
We need to break away from that.
De hecho, inclusive, en la última Bienal de La Habana, ya yo mirando la Bienal desde el museo y no dirigiendo la Bienal, hicimos una exposición de artistas, mujeres caribeñas. Pero es la primera vez que el Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes de Cuba hace una exposición dedicada al Caribe. La primera vez. Increíble.
We had a museum focused on women artists, but it was the first time that we actually focused on Caribbean artists.
Bueno, aquí está Annalise Davis,
And Alice David,
que estuvo aquí, está por aquí,
oh, okay.
que estuvo en la primera Bienal que yo participé en el 2009 y estuvo en esta exposición del museo.
And he participated, or she participated in the
Pero además,
exhibition in 2009.
Yo no tengo el dinero que tenía la burguesía cubana antes de la revolución, pero le pedí a Annalise que si no puede donar la obra, ahora tengo que negociarlo con ella, para tener en la colección nuestra artistas del Caribe, que no tenemos tampoco.
I don't have the same funding that we would have had before the revolution, but I'm thankful to her,
Annalie Davis.
Annalise Davis, for the contributions that she's brought.
Y nada, esa es una carencia que tenemos.
And that is one of the gaps that we have.
Entonces, como nosotros, inclusive cuando entré en la Bienal de La Habana, hasta los artistas cubanos contemporáneos, a veces el arte que se produce en el Caribe, como no es el arte de las grandes superproducciones, como no aparece en las enciclopedias de Art Now, le parece que le falta algo a ese arte.
And when we started looking at these West Indian artists, there was this perception, this incorrect perception that we were missing something.
Y para mí la Bienal de La Habana fue una revelación, ¿no? fue reencontrarme con el arte del Caribe, con el arte de Latinoamérica.
And that experience enabled me to re-encounter the West Indian art, Caribbean art.
Ahora es el desafío ahora es como tú desmontas una obra de Canaletto, de Lucas Cranes o la colección completa de España con los Sorolla para poner arte latinoamericano del Caribe.
And that's the challenge when we want to bring in Latin American art and art from the Caribbean. That's the difficulty.
Pero habrá que crear un espacio para eso. Y habrá que ver cómo nosotros podemos estimular a través de donaciones, de colaboraciones. No tenemos grandes boards que financian, ni existe una política empresarial fiscal en Cuba que permita que la gente done obras al museo.
We have limited resources, and we don't have a big board that can enable us to reach out and get all the financing that we would really need.
Pero estamos necesitados de tener Latinoamérica, Caribe y África.
But we need to collaborate with the Caribbean, Latin America, and Africa.
Porque es un museo, como lo verán aquí, tiene 7 escuelas europeas
As you
de
can,
primerísimo nivel.
we have 7 European schools that are top notch.
Tiene también arte latinoamericano. Quizás la colección más completa como país latinoamericano es México.
And perhaps the Latin American country that has the best collection is Mexico.
Hicimos una exposición recientemente de 400 años de arte mexicano.
We did an exhibition of 400 years of Mexican art recently,
Todo el mundo se quedó impresionado por la
and
obra.
everybody was blown away by that
Pero en
exhibition.
el resto de los países falta.
But the rest of the countries,
Y
there's a
nosotros que
lot.
venimos, porque no hubiera asistido Wilfredo Landsc, que es nuestro gran artista, si no se hubieran desarrollado conceptos como lo afrocaribeño. Si Landsc no hubiera estado en Haití, si Landsc no hubiera pasado por Martinica, si Landsc no hubiera llegado a Dominicana, hubiera sido imposible hacer la serie donde fue más original.
We had the participation of Martinique, of other Caribbean countries, and that was phenomenal. That enabled us to achieve a lot.
Landsc siempre decía, alguien le dijo, bueno, pero es que Picasso llegó a la máscara africana antes que usted.
And we had to say that Picasso actually reached the African mask. He explored that before us.
Pero Landsc contestó, el problema es que Picasso tuvo que salir a buscar a África. La diferencia es que África estaba en mí.
The challenge was that Picasso had to go for Africa, but for us, Africa is within us.
Pero así todo, todavía la obra europea, de la estancia europea de Landsc, está muy conectada con Picasso.
And European artwork is very closely linked to Picasso.
Inclusive aquí se puso la jungla. Todavía la jungla de Landsc se puso aquí.
We also saw the jungle, the painting about the jungle.
Todavía me resulta muy picasiana.
It seems very Picassan to me.
Para mí la ruptura de Landsc está en Canaima
And the structure of it, you can see it there.
y está en Huracán.
And you can see it in Hurricane,
Lo que es el 45 y el 46.
which is 45 and
Y
47.
es súper interesante cuando Pierre Maville lo invita a Haití y su estancia en Haití.
And it was very interesting to see that when they were invited to Haiti,
Cambió la figuración por completo.
it changed the configuration
Fue como lo
totally.
dijo Lee Crane a Jackson Polo, ahora sí eres Polo, ¿no? Cuando empezó a chorrear los drippers. Y aquí, cuando Landsc llega a Haití y llega a Martinica y empieza a hacer todo lo que hace después, había que decir, ahora sí eres Wilfredo Landsc, ya no eres Picasso.
And when he moved from Martinique to Haiti and the other territories, we could see his work coming out then.
Bueno, entiendo mucho siempre responder.
Thank you very
Disculpe.
much for this.
Thank you very much, Jorge, for that. What would I call it? Peregrination across many different themes that interweave the way in which our institutions have become and are becoming in the future. But I want now to turn finally to you, Maya, to have your take on how are these conversations evolving? What are our thoughts in the way in which we can positively recognize the role of the visual arts in the development of national or regional identities, and to really to recognize first and foremost that when we talk about a museum or a gallery, we're talking about, for the Caribbean, we're talking about a Western construction of a particular form of presenting heritage, history, culture. And how can our Caribbean institutions move away from that, as he has represented it? How can we do that?
Well, I think we mentioned that sort of concept of the museum as a repository before. And what we're really trying to do at the National Gallery of the Cayman Islands is to move away from that concept, that sort of European concept of this beautiful building in which all of these old things are housed, because it does feel quite static, and often it comes with a lot of very challenging and traumatic histories. At our gallery, I think what we're looking at is exploring how our own culture can express itself. So for example, the rich storytelling cultures of the Caribbean, how can we, as Varela said, bring in this concept of the oral as well? How can we reinvent what we're doing to move away from this concept of just a physical building with items inside it to a living, breathing, constantly changing and moving space in which the community can express itself? And I think to feed into your previous question as well, I think these are connected ideas, because it's also about diversifying voices and diversifying experiences. We have really made an effort to have committees, for example. So we're constantly checking ourselves. Is the staff of the museum the ones making all of the decisions about what happens in the museum? It shouldn't necessarily be that way, right? We should be receiving feedback from our communities of what they want to see, whether that's through focus groups, whether it's through having those formal committees like a collections committee to ensure that we're being ethical in our decision making and representing all of these diverse voices that we have in our community, and ensuring that that continues for the future. Again, switching up our approach when the approach needs to be switched up. Culture is constantly changing and we have to respond to that. So yeah, I think it's really in this programmatic model, which goes back to the roots of what the Cayman Islands National Gallery is, right?
Thank you very much, Maya. I think it was important to have these conversations, and particularly to recognize, as indeed whether you mentioned, that when we talk about these spaces and these institutions, we are not just talking about the visual, but we're talking about the performative and the oral. These are key components that we have to keep in mind as we build and develop and evolve our institutions. And should they be institutions, as opposed to spaces, community-based spaces, how would you respond
if
to
I
that?
could add just something to that, I think it's also about when you say community spaces, there's a lot of programs that we run that are maybe feel disconnected from visual art. So for example, we have a wellness program, which is really about, again, facilitating a community space and allowing the whole public to come into the space and utilize the museum. So whether that's a yoga class on the lawn or it's nutrition classes, we do an open mic poetry night, which really speaks to the way that visual arts and these oral cultures inform each other. So nothing is really in silo, everything's interconnected.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to give the last part of our session over to each of the members of the panel to say a few words. Is there anything you would particularly like to convey or has particularly raised its head for you in terms of our conversation today and in terms of the way in which we should be looking at the evolution of these spaces? Evolution, revolution, whatever. Verle.
Thank you. There's sort of two things that have been on my mind during this conversation, and sort of to bring it back to the National Gallery conversation. You just asked about models and why is the Caribbean, or at least the Anglophone Caribbean, so wedded to this idea of a National Gallery? right? Is it just a name, or does there come, what kind of baggage comes with that concept, and why is it deemed so important? Not knocking the national galleries. I think they have been transformative presences in the various contexts in which they have operated, even though sometimes they're also quite contentious in many ways, and in terms of, you know, the way they are positioned in the critical dialogues. So I think we need to probably have another conversation about those models and really how they can be translated into something that is really more culturally appropriate and relevant. But the second thing I wanted to put on the table, which I didn't respond to with regards to your question of exoticism, the elephant in the room for many of us is tourism. Right? I mean, how do we engage with tourism? How does tourism dialogue with the idea of national identity dialogues within the Caribbean? How do those two coexist? Right? We are located steps away from the cruise ship terminal. I would say probably easily 75% of our visitors are cruise ship tourists. What does that mean to a museum such as ours, which is so connected to this idea of a Caymanian identity? You know, so I think that's another kind of conversation that really needs to be had more actively.
Robert, have you any final words that you'd like to share, or thoughts or ideas that have emerged as a result of this conversation, or that you'd like to make sure you put on the table before we close?
No, es que los contextos en que estamos nosotros situados, no sé, a veces es difícil porque es más fácil para cualquier cubano, tú dices, ir a España, ir a Madrid, o ir a Europa que llegar a Barbados.
We're in a very challenging context because it's easier for a Cuban to go to Europe than it is to come to the Caribbean.
Todavía no hemos podido resolver quizás eso que decía Edward Camao, de las conexiones submarinas.
We haven't been able to deal with the undersea connections.
Entonces todavía falta de verdad entender cómo se producen esas conexiones submarinas.
So we need to figure out how we can make those connections possible.
Ahora mismo la delegación cubana que vino al CARIFESTA
Right now, the Cuban delegation to CARIFESTA
ha sido tremendo para poder llegar aquí. Había que pasar por una cantidad de lugares,
had a hard time getting here. We had to go through a number of places
como si estuviéramos viajando a Japón o a China.
as if we were going to Japan or China.
Entonces, lo primero es cómo creamos esas conexiones.
So the first thing is to create those crucial connections.
Estamos tan distantes y a la vez hay tantas raíces culturales que nos unen, pero es una cosa, es como una maldición que no nos deja que nos integremos verdaderamente.
We have roots that we share, but we also need to overcome those obstacles that are facing us.
Nuestras exposiciones no itineran. A veces para si podemos hacer una encuesta a los estudiantes de arte en Cuba, hay que ver cuántos artistas europeos conocen y cuántos artistas del Caribe saben quiénes son.
It would be interesting to do a survey among our students to find out how many European
Y así lo podemos
artists they know and how
hacer.
many Caribbean
Podemos
artists.
hacer una encuesta ya no solo entre el público general, sino entre los que estudian arte.
And we also need to do a survey among the public
¿Cuáles
in
son sus
general.
artistas fetiches? ¿Cuáles son sus artistas de referencia?
Who are your favorite artists?
Habría que crear un museo itinerante del Caribe,
We need to have an itinerant museum in the Caribbean
donde nos conectemos todos.
where we can connect with each other.
Es difícil,
It's a
pero
challenge,
nada es imposible.
but nothing is impossible.
I want to thank you very much, Jorge, for putting back on the table an idea that had been born in 1983 about a mobile museum of the Caribbean. We need to think about that. Maya, any last thoughts or words you'd like to share with us?
Well, actually, what Jorge reminded me of was a story that my dad told me from when he was a child, which is quite interesting. His teacher put two quotes up, two pieces of writing up on the board. And one was, you know, blah, 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 Derek Walcott, and then blah, 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 William Shakespeare. And he said, you know, okay, I want you to critique these pieces of writing. And they tore up the Derek Walcott piece. This is terrible writing. It's, you know, the imagery is da 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 da. And they just lavished praise on the William Shakespeare one. And at the end of the exercise, his teacher then swapped the titles. And it was a really great example of how this perception of these European names is informing how we see ourselves in a way. So I think one of the roles that national institutions can also play is to help us challenge our own perceptions of who we are and challenge pervasive narratives about our country and our experiences in our various contexts. And hopefully we can, as Verla said, provide a platform for these dialogues and conversations that challenge our own notions of ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maya. Thank you very much, team. I want to ask on behalf of us all if we could give a round of applause to our three guests, Jorge, Maya, and Verla. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being with us, for engaging in this conversation with us. And we look forward to continuing the dialogue on many different levels. And now I'd like to turn the floor back over to Clyde to introduce the third and final panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will have a few minutes longer than we had last time in transition. One of our panelists is joining us virtually. And also I've been told by the people who are streaming this on the CARIFESTA platform that in between the conversations, they're running some promotions. So we have to wait a signal from them as to when we start conversation 3. So Natalie, I don't know if we need to rearrange for your one virtual guest and one. And there is a station with juices and water at the back, just a reminder, if you would like. He's going to signal me. If you want to ask Peter, are you going to sit there or are you going to do it? Yes, get seated. He looks like he's ready. Well, welcome back to our third conversation. This one, building blocks, fundraising campaign launch. Our moderator is Dr. Natalie McGuire, who in addition to being a curator at the Barbados Historical Society, is a board member of the Barbados National Art Gallery. And as such, on the journey to the establishment of a national gallery, she is very well informed of the many obstacles and building blocks that are needed to create a national gallery and a fundraising campaign. So Natalie, over to you to introduce your guests.
Thank you so much, Clyde, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for still being with us on this rainy afternoon, and welcome to this conversation on fundraising for the Barbados National Art Gallery. Fundraising is a vital part of making the gallery not just a building, but a living institution that engages our community, preserves our heritage, and inspires future generations. I'm delighted to be joined here in person by Peter Thompson and also remotely by Julie Crooks. I'm not sure, Travis or Anna, if we could bring her up at the moment while I introduce our speakers. And I'm really, there Julie is, I'm really excited to, as part of the Barbados National Art Gallery Board, to be introducing Julie as having been engaged as development advisor for the board, and Peter, who has recently been engaged as our fundraising consultant for the gallery. So by way of introduction, I'm just going to quickly read their bios. So Dr. Julie Crooks, the Assistant Curator of Photography at the Art Gallery of Ontario, received her PhD in the Department of History of Art and Archaeology at the School of Oriental and African Studies in the University of London, where her research focused on historical photography in Sierra Leone, West Africa, and the diaspora. She has curated and co-curated a number of exhibitions in Toronto since 2006, including No Justice, No Peace, From Ferguson to Toronto in February 2017, co-curated with Reese de Guzman and co-organized by the Ryerson Image Center and Band. She's also the co-curator for the Royal Ontario Museum and of Africa Project, where she was the Rebanks postdoctoral fellow from 2014 to 2016. And her work involves large-scale fundraising projects for curatorial visions. And then here with us, we have Peter L. Thompson, MBA CFRE, who is a seasoned fund development consultant and cultural leader with over 2 decades of experience advancing mission-driven organizations. He secured multi-million-dollar funding from international agencies, including successful proposals that brought 1.8 million Barbados dollars to 10 Habitat, and coordinated a 3 million euro regional project with the Caribbean Development Bank, CARICOM, UE, and UNESCO. As executive director of Two Rivers Gallery in Canada for 12 years, Peter transformed the institution into a thriving cultural hub and managed a multi-million-dollar budget and expanded education programs, established an endowment fund, and increased corporate and foundation support by 300%. Passionate about cultural development in Barbados, Peter combines strategic vision, proven fundraising expertise, and innovative programs designed to strengthen institutions and accelerate social, cultural, and economic growth. So we're delighted to be joined by both of them. And we'll keep this as a relaxed conversation to explore opportunities and challenges of raising support for the arts here in Barbados. So I just want to check that Julie's able to hear us clearly and that we can hear her before I dive into my first question addressed to you both.
I can hear you. You hear me?
Okay, so she can hear us, but we can't hear her. So I'll leave that to Anna and Travis to organize. But my first question to you both is, why is fundraising so critical for the Barbados National Art Gallery at this stage of its development? And maybe we can start with Peter while the tech team work on Julie.
Well, thank you, Natalie, and thank all of you here. Well, of course, fundraising is existential. Without raising the funds to build an organization and an institution, we are not going to have a national art gallery. But I was really inspired by both Jorge and Maya in the previous session, because what they illustrated quite brilliantly was that an art gallery, a national art gallery, is not a building. It is much, much more than that. And so one of the reasons that we have had such difficulty over the years, over the decades, in achieving a national art gallery, I think, is because we were not ambitious enough. We need to build much more than a building. We need to build a sustainable institution which serves all of Barbados.
Thank you. Julie?
Can you hear me now? No.
Sorry. Did they say you can go ahead, Julie, that we can?
Can you hear me now? You can hear me? Great, okay. First, I'll just make a little correction. My title now is Curator Arts of Global Africa and the Diaspora. So I actually head a new department as of 2020 that is dedicated to the arts and programming, and of course, exhibition of art from the continent as well as its global diaspora. And yeah, I too, and first let me say I'm very sorry for not being there in person, but super excited to be part of this conversation, as well as this initiative. And I too was really taken by the comments of the previous panel. I'm thinking about the ways in which there is a kind of moment, if you will, a zeitgeist, that is, especially from the, I guess, the standpoint of the diaspora, really interested in what is happening in the region in terms of its cultural development, heritage, and of course the visual art, and particularly contemporary visual artists. And so you see that in the kinds of exhibitions that are being mounted that feature Caribbean artists or artists from the region, as well as the way that, how do I say this? There's a kind of focus on the region given all of the turbulence and uncertainty in the world. I feel as if there's been a kind of shift. And so for me, this is a kind of critical moment to kind of seize on that kind of shifting focus, the ways in which we're moving away from a kind of Western art historical canon, and trying to be to make space for a range of other kinds of art histories. So the idea of a heritage building that now houses and stewards the a kind of modern and contemporary collection that already exists that can be built on, I think can be very exciting for to kind of move forward with this project.
Thank you, Julie. And continuing with you, from your perspective as our development advisor, what opportunities do you see for the Barbados National Art Gallery to position itself in the philanthropic and cultural landscape?
Yeah, it's a great question because, of course, I'm a curator. But I am finding for myself and amongst my colleagues, not only in my institution, but kind of globally, we are no longer relying on our development employee or staff members or departments to do the fundraising, because they are called upon, many times to be, thinking about larger projects, larger campaigns, bringing in millions and millions of dollars. And if you want an acquisition, if you want a work of art, if you're interested in a programming initiative, if you're interested in a book that you want to publish that is based on the collection or an artist that you're interested in, sometimes we have to come up with very unique strategies. And I think that's what excites me about this project. I don't live in Barbados. My mother was from Barbados. I have a kind of maybe romantic, but also deep connection, familial connection to the island. And I guess when Alessandra and Allison told me about the collection, which, I must admit, I didn't have any idea existed. I really thought about the diaspora. How can we draw upon an already existing kind of donor population or constituency? Fast forward to 2025 and we gathering, and this idea of connecting to the diaspora, to the island, to the nation, to its histories. I think that really created a kind of impetus for me, and I started to kind of think about how that could happen. How could we move out of kind of traditional development models and think about, bringing in, creating interest from the diaspora, and not only a kind of Barbadian diaspora, but a larger Caribbean diaspora that exists here in Toronto and New York and Miami, in the UK. So yeah, for me, that was really a kind of impetus and a kind of way forward with this initiative.
So almost, developing a kind of ecosystem or network that spans across geographical borders. And Peter, as you've embarked on your role with us as fundraising consultant, what's unique about raising funds for an art gallery here compared to some of the other contexts that you've experienced previously?
It's actually very different. I mean, part of it is simply that I'm so passionate about it, but the fundamental difference is that a very, very large part of our public doesn't actually understand what a national art gallery is or does. When I raise money for the Heart and Stroke Foundation or the Caribbean Development Bank, yeah, everybody knows the Heart and Stroke Foundation helps people who had heart attacks or strokes, and the Caribbean Development Bank funds development projects. But it is not only that much of our public doesn't understand what a national art gallery is that they think they understand and they're completely wrong. They think that we want to build a warehouse for art, which is a very damaging preconception. Permit me, I'm going to get a little philosophical. Heidegger, The Origin of the Work of Art, said, the mere object is not the work of art. And Heidegger wasn't disrespecting paintings on the wall or sculptures or other art objects. Heidegger was pointing to the work that art does in the world. The work of creating meaning, the work of sustaining our civilization and our culture, the work of sustaining the human history of creativity and innovation. The work that a national art gallery does is fundamentally developmental. Art is not instrumental, but a national gallery is. It's a national gallery. We are asking all of our citizens to join us in building something important for the nation, and the nation that is spread out with its diaspora across the globe, across generations. The National Gallery is to develop Barbados. It's to give value to existence in Barbados. It's to give value to Barbadians. The thing about this is that when our public understands this, it transforms their relationship with us. It transforms their ability and their intent in supporting us. And it is not, of course, the preconception often in going to ask people with deep pockets for some of their money, or corporations with deep pockets for some of their money, is that they give for the prestige, or that they give to have their name on a building or a room or a wall. But my experience is that these people are deeply more human than that. That when they understand that it is for their children and their grandchildren, when they understand that it is to build the Barbadian community, it is not just a prestige project for some important artists, that it is for all of us, that it transforms their understanding of their relationship to the gallery and their willingness to support us. And so I have had the experience, even though I only started a month ago, of talking to people who tried very hard to put me off, tried very hard to say, Peter, why are you talking to me? You sure you don't want to talk to my wife? Trying very hard to convince me that they had nothing to contribute, that they were not willing to contribute. But when I explained to them what a national gallery actually is, they immediately joined the dots. They made the connection. When I explained that a national gallery in Barbados should be full of school children, 5 days a week, not some narrow, elite, contemplative, silent atmosphere, but an active, progressive, active component of the community in developing our children. These people immediately make the connection. Well, that's where we have all these young boys shooting each other in the street. This is where we have to start. We have to start building community, building culture, building our own civilization with this sort of national initiative.
Thank you, Peter. I think that feeds very nicely into the next point of discussion, which was around how both of you felt community engagement and public trust feed into successful fundraising efforts. So I'm not sure, Peter, if you want to add anything to what you had just said regarding that before we hand over to Julie for her thoughts.
Well, contrary to what may seem obvious, fundraising is not fundamentally about asking for money. Fundraising is about discovering how you can be valuable enough to someone that they ask you how they can help. And this can be transformative for the Barbados National Art Gallery and for Barbados. The thing is that the visual arts and visual artists have enormous capacity to contribute to Barbados. What they do is enormously important. In my experience in Canada, I'll give you a story. One of my very young programmers, just not even out of art school yet, she came to me after our education program was active and successful, and she said, but there are children who aren't in school. What about children in the hospital? So I conceded, yes, there were children in the hospital. And this was of particular interest to me because when you're a fundraiser, I don't know how to put this so it doesn't seem crass, but I'll say it anyway. When I'm raising money, people are saying, well, why should I give money to you rather than to children with cancer? It's always comparative. It's always competitive. And so I was intrigued by the opportunity to deliver value where many art galleries haven't yet started delivering value. And so we set up a program, we called it Art Heals, it's pretty obvious. And we started out in the pediatric ward and the adolescent psychiatric ward. The important thing is that we talked to the clinical experts. We didn't just barge in with coloring books. We talked to the people to whom we were supposed to be delivering value. The children, the patients, and the experts who were in charge of helping them to heal. And we did research, and it turned out that we had enormous value to contribute. Hospitals measure their success in healing time, for example. And the scientific research is very, very clear. Happy children heal faster than frightened, angry, traumatized children. Anything that we could contribute to the humanity of their stay in the hospital was of enormous value to the clinicians. And so we did. And we did it with a tiny, insignificant, insufficient budget. But we did the best we could until that money ran out. And then it was the clinical staff who went to the administration of the hospital and increased our budget tenfold. So it is the value that we can deliver across the society which makes our fundraising efforts transformed.
Thank you, Peter. And Julie, some reflections on community engagement and public trust feeding into successful fundraising efforts?
Well, I think you can't be successful without that. Um, the community or communities have to kind of buy into the vision, the project, um, and this may sound crass, but um, there is an idea of like what a kind of reciprocity, I guess. What ultimately um, is are these communities getting out of this project? And to Peter's point, um, I think for me, this notion of legacy is very crucial to the vision for the Barbados National Art Gallery. Um, when you're speaking to prospective donors and supporters who, or communities who historically have not had any engagement with art, art galleries, national galleries, galleries, um, it's very daunting. And there has to be a kind of buy-in, but a vision for them. It's important for them to see themselves and their stories, um, and a kind of legacy within the institution. And I think nowadays one can be very that can be very malleable. It doesn't have to fit into a specific box. If in fact you want um, a range of community support and interest and buy-in. Um, so for me, that immediately um, lessens some of the anxiety around these kind of elitist notions about as the previous panel spoke about art galleries and what over hundreds of years they've stood for, but how can a project like this shift some of those ideas and notions by really making a concerted effort to speak to donors that aren't the large corporations or folks with lots of disposable cash, but someone who over time really wants to be part of this legacy, be part of a project that they can say they were part of. I mean, that gives immense pride to um, to uh, to both actually large and small donors, right? There is and it isn't only about a kind of egotistical relationship to the project, but a sense of real pride and ownership. Um, so yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Julie. We have a couple minutes left in our panels. So as we close, I'd like to ask you both for one takeaway, and that is if the Barbados National Art Gallery should prioritize just one piece of fundraising advice over the next year, what would it be? Julie, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think, well, it's kind of two things. I guess being extremely focused about obviously your fundraising goal, but the second part, and and I think I've kind of stood by this in terms of the fundraising that I've done kind of at the side of my desk, it is to be kind of blue sky about what the ultimate goal is. You can put a number to it, of course, as you will, but the blue sky idea for me is to not be restrained, I guess, is what I'm saying. To be quite bold. Peter used the word passionate, rigorous, and intentional about how you are going to get all of the various stakeholders and constituents interested in what is a kind of monumental project. And for me to kind of think outside the box, outside of the kind of status quo, again, models of fundraising in various development offices and departments, allows for a kind of flexibility. And yeah, I think that's my main piece of advice for now. I'm sure there'll be other things, but I think that idea of you just never know who you're speaking to and what they might offer. So not discounting anyone that seemingly may not be interested. It is really about cultivating, and for me, that cultivation can also be extend to a more a kind of, as I said, blue sky approach.
Yes. Yes, Julie, you're completely correct. We need to not be imprisoned either by past experiences or by rigid preconceptions. We need to be blue sky. We need to be innovative. The fundraising campaign for the Barbados National Art Gallery is going to be a little surprising in the Barbados context, because for the next 18 or 19 months, it's going to seem as though not much is happening. But it is during those months that we will be raising 60 or 70% of what we need, because it's raised not by having galas or cocktail parties. It's raised by having deep conversations with hundreds and hundreds of people. And those conversations are across the width and breadth of Barbados, both people that we think have deep pockets, but every other stakeholder, the educational system, the health system, industries of all sorts, architects of all sorts. We need to build a coalition who understands that we are engaging in this really exciting national development project. And that is how we will get to where we need to go.
Thank you so much, Julie and Peter, for your insights. And thank you all for joining this conversation. The Barbados National Art Gallery belongs to all of us, and we look forward as we develop this fundraising campaign, which is ultimately about building a future where arts can thrive. We look forward to your continued support in making that vision a reality. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie, Peter. So we've come to the end of the conversations, but not the end of the program. In addition to all of you here, we have been streamed on the CARIFESTA network as well as YouTube. And those watching on the CARIFESTA network are going to be leaving us now. So you are going to get a vote of thanks before the end of the program, because there's some important people to thank for making these conversations possible. First of all, we'd like to thank the two A+, Alison Thompson and Alessandra Cummins, both of the board of the Barbados National Art Gallery and the International Association of Art Critics, Southern Caribbean chapter, for the organization of this symposium. Special thanks, of course, to the speakers and moderators of the conversations. And a personal special thank you, Jorge, to you for introducing pluriversal to my vocabulary. I think I can find a lot of use for that. Akila Watts and the CARIFESTA Secretariat for their support of this within the CARIFESTA 15 program. Neil Barnard for designing and producing the Alison Chapman Andrews book, as well as Cot Printery. Versha Harris and Russell Watson for facilitating what comes next, the special screening of Versha's They Say You Can Dream a Thing More Than Once, which has been acquired by the Barbados National Gallery. The translation teams, both in personal and online. The technical team of Anastasia Bernard, Travis Springer, and Brian Remise. The staff of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society for their support and coordination in the Trevor Carmichael Wall Garden Theatre. But most of all, to all of you who joined us both virtually and those of you who came out to join us in person, thank you very much, and I'm sure you will enjoy what comes next. I'll now invite Alison Thompson in her role as chair of the acquisitions subcommittee of the Barbados National Art Gallery to introduce Versha's video.
One of the activities of the board of the Barbados National Art Gallery that we've been involved in on an ongoing basis, actually my favorite role, is that of acquisitions, the building of a national art collection. Last year, we were able to bring into the collection Versha Harris's They Say You Can Dream a Thing More Than Once. There were a number of important considerations for the acquisition committee in making this purchase. This included the fact that the artist was not previously represented in the national collection, and that this work has been included in a number of important international shows, including Alice Yard in Trinidad, the 4th Moscow International Biennial for Young Art. It was shown in Munich, or was it Berlin? In 2014, at the International Biennial in San Francisco, courtesy of Riddle in 2021, and finally in Documenta 15 at the Grimwelt Museum in Kassel, Germany in 2022. This acquisition also represents an important early addition to our nascent collection of video works. We've been working in tandem with Russell Watson, who's been advising us on the important considerations regarding the display and contextualizing as well as managing of digital work. And I will tell you, I had a vision for the showing of this work from the moment that we learned that CARIFESTA was going to be here, and we were wondering what was it that the Barbados National Art Gallery was going to contribute. And my vision was that we were going to show this new acquisition in Block A, which is the shell of a building just outside here, which is to be the future home of the National Gallery. Whether we were going to project it onto the facade, whether we were going to be able to show it inside, it was this idea that this work could bring this building to life and to show that this could be a space where exciting things could happen. They say you can dream a thing more than once, and I felt the Versha's aspirations for dreams and journeys were the perfect mix for what we're hoping that this building could become. Unfortunately, that was more ambitious than we could attain at this point, but right, Russell, we have a vision and this will happen. But in the meantime, I invite you to sit here and to enjoy one of our latest acquisitions, Versha Harris. They say you can dream a thing more than once, and Versha is with us for the screening.
In the magic come from outer space. Look, I summon you. Let me see thy face. Who is the fairest? Magic girl of the moon. Who now is the fairest for the moon? Over the 7 jewels, beyond the 7th hall, in the cottage of the 7th world, when Snow White there is one more.
Could we ask Versha to please stand? Bersha? Thank you. And now for the final event, Alison will explain the book launch, which now happens, after which we invite you at your leisure to join us in the galleries of the Barbados Museum for the opening of Crystal Lattices, Reflections and Refractions, Story of Caribbean of CARIFESTA over 15 editions.
I just wanted to mention that if you want to see more of Verja's work, she currently has work on at the exhibition that's up at Queen's Park Gallery right now. And that work refers to a recent commission by Oxford University for the Christopher Codrington Library. It's a tribute to Sir Hugh Springer. It's a wonderful work. And if you go to the Facebook page of the Barbados National Art Gallery, there's a link to a wonderful article by Dame Marina Warner that really lays out the really complex and intricate and magnificent work that Verja has made. So I really encourage you to do that. So finally, to wrap up our program, we are returning to Alison Chapman Andrews, to whom today's events have been dedicated. Among the many ways that Alison contributed to the art community in Barbados was that she was an avid art collector. Alison made a commitment many years ago that every time she sold a work, she would buy a work by another artist. And she decided to bequeath a significant portion of that collection to the Barbados National Art Gallery. This bequest numbers 156 works by 92 artists. Many of whom were not previously represented in the collection. In addition to this, Alison produced a full draft of a catalog of the artists represented in the collection, along with her own reflections on the works, and sometimes the artists, as well as more broadly, her process of understanding or interpreting the works. In my short introduction to the catalog I've written, Alison hasn't simply reproduced factual biographies of the artists. She has laid out her personal relationships with these works and often with their makers. It is so clearly her voice, her recollections, her no punches pulled assessments, her great wealth of encouragement, her enduring passion for the visual arts in Barbados. And I conclude by saying that Alison's gift to the nation of her art collection represents her sincerest commitment to and connection with the art community in Barbados. This book is a testament to her belief that those works will speak to generations of viewers who are as intent on looking as a pathway to understanding as she was. As Clyde mentioned, I have to say a special thank you to Neil Barnard and 809 Design for not only the excellent design work of the publication, but for sponsoring the printing of the book. This is a generous gesture. And of course, Alison's grand vision, that is her art collection, is another example of the ways in which individuals have expressed their commitment to and belief in the project of building a national gallery for Barbados. And as Natalie said, it will take a community to accomplish this objective. The books are on sale over at the table. They are $60 each. Unfortunately, we're only able to accept cash today, but they will be available in the shop here at the museum from tomorrow. So I really encourage you to come and take a look and take a copy home. And I think that wraps up everything. So as Clyde said, we invite you down to the lower courtyard to see the exhibition there. Sorry, Anne, did you want to say something? Absolutely. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap up, Anne. Thank you. But I encourage you to have a conversation with Verja. And as I mentioned before, that this is not the end of that project. that project will return in the full vision that I have of it. All right. So thank you all again for coming, and please enjoy the opening down below.